Hello and welcome to the Hacking State podcast. This is your host, Alex Mershak. With me today is Daniel Hess, the man behind MoreBirths, morebirths.com, as well as the MoreBirths Twitter account, X account rather. Daniel has been doing a lot of research and writing lately on the fertility crisis and trying to address it. It's very multifaceted problems and potential solutions. So I'm happy to have Daniel on. Daniel, thank you for coming on the show. To get started, can you
Good
tell
to
us
talk to you, Alex.
a little bit about why you became interested in the fertility crisis and why you think it's the most important problem to solve right now? I know that you have 6 kids yourself.
Yeah. So I was first in my early tw I'm now in my mid 40s. That's not a I'm not going to hide that. I was originally interested in investing probably in my 20s and so forth. And what became shocking to me as I looked into at it was that the economies sit on the plate tectonics of demography, and there's a lot of countries in the developed world that are in steep demographic decline. So we have this view of eternal growth, of progress infinitely into the future, but there's a giant hitch, a giant problem, a giant kink in that narrative, which is that fertility in a lot of developed countries is really crashing very hard.
Okay. And this, my understanding is that this presents a problem simply because with the population decline, you're going to get a decrease in, well, not only a decrease in general economic output and a lot of social programs and other things that are dependent on continued growth. But in particular, my understanding is that the concern here is that the speed of innovation is going to go down as a result of the population falling.
Oh
Why is
yeah,
that the case?
that's something that Robin Hanson talks about. But I'm gonna share my
Sure.
I'm gonna send a request for screen sharing. You gotta approve that first, and then I can
Yeah, you're
share.
good to go.
Do you see this? Or
Yes.
yes. So here, what we're seeing right now is a plot of on the x-axis we've got patents per million residents on a log scale, and on the y-axis we have total fertility.
Hmm.
So it's actually the most innovative countries as measured by patenting that have the most uh, severe demographic problems. Now, what do you see? What do you notice? What is the most innovative country by this scale here?
Well, according to this, you've got South Korea at the
Oh
highest
yeah,
per
yeah.
capita
That is
innovation.
our the most patents per capita of any country is South Korea. What also has the
Yeah,
lowest
with
birth
the
rate
with
of?
the absolute lowest TFR.
Yeah, right, exactly. And this is a pattern that you see almost everywhere. Almost all of the high innovation countries have below replacement fertility. Some devastatingly low. So, um, you
And
know the
what does this correlation indicate to you?
well, I mean the modern world and a lot of the factors associated with the modern economy, work, long educations. These are the hallmarks that we consider to be representative of progress, but at the same time, they introduce a whole lot of problems with fertility rates.
Mhm. So let's talk a little bit about why the most developed nations have seem to have the lowest fertility rates. I know that there's one prominent exception to this, which is Israel, and we might get into that later. Um, but there's obviously some lifestyle, cultural norms that are playing a role in this. People having children later, higher parental investment, right, in fewer children, as well as educational attainment, right? Women getting into education, men and women both delaying fertility or delaying family creation in order to climb higher in their careers. Um, one of the one of these aspects that's been discussed a lot is women's role in education and in the workforce. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, this is, it's definitely the case that long educations for men and for women, we should actually talk about both because
Yeah.
actually, although women, we talk about women having a limit in terms of their age and fertility, the same really applies to men both directly because their fertility also goes down with age, but also usually in the vast majority of cases, people are partnered with
People of
other
this,
people that, of
right.
their own age. So
Mhm.
so it's a, you know, the the guy who waits until 40 till he's established, most of his his same age peers who are his most likely partners will have aged mostly out of their fertility. So you have to understand that peak fertility is actually in the 20s,
Mhm.
which, and actually it's really peak fertility is like in the very early 20s, like 20, 21, 22.
Yeah.
You're, so um, when educations extend until 30 or beyond, and then people want to get established, they want to get a job, they want to get established in their job, they want to buy a house, all these things, people put forth all these requirements. Then in a lot of cases the fertility window is just very small. One aspect of the baby boom is that people just married at very high rates at very early ages. So the average age that a woman got married during the baby boom was 20.
Wow.
So
That's
when
like
is
unbelievable today.
yeah, no, it is. You can't even hardly imagine that. But and so it didn't take, explicit pronatalism or explicit effort to get high birth rates. When people uh, married so young, it just was a natural thing, and you
Okay,
just
but
had a lot of time for that.
was not a contributor to women being interested and also able to marry at such a young age. The fact that they were reliant on a man for, uh, some semblance of an income or
Yeah, no,
household.
you're not wrong. I mean, one thing that I think we need to think about this though is that I think how we got into it is probably not how we're going to get out of it.
Yeah.
The I don't think there's much political constituency to roll back women's educations
No,
or anything. I
I
do
don't
want
think
to,
you're gonna put that genie back in the bottle.
but I do want to, one thing, our free, uh, liberated, advanced, progressive countries really have to consider that the anti-female education model is something that's being tried right now. It's happening in the world right now. Afghanistan has very high fertility rates by denying women education. So
Hmm.
that it works. That's not what we want, but we as developed countries have to have viable alternatives, and we have to think very hard about this and develop, pronatal policies and so forth, or not pronatal policy, pronatal culture, especially. We have to think deeply on a lot of levels, which I'm going to discuss more. But if kind of free liberal countries, don't solve this, there are very illiberal countries like Afghanistan that are, having uh, tons of
That
uh,
will be the people of the future, right?
it will if we don't, the future belongs to whoever shows up for it.
Yeah.
So
So let's talk about some of the innovative ways that have been proposed for how you might deal with this. In particular, I'm talking about women's education, also men's education. Like I think there is a role for men to play in solving the fertility crisis. It's not simply on women to, you know, change their behavior to resolve this. So let's let's
yeah, and
start
I
because we're
do
already
try to
talking
avoid
about
I do try to avoid a little bit about like saying who's responsible, because I think I just think we however we got here, we need to work together and get out.
yeah,
There's plenty of,
there's
short,
a
one
there's
problem that, pertaining to that, by the way, is kind of the high achievement of women and the comparative low achievement of men
yeah,
in higher education and so forth.
right.
So these are things that are issues. So
So
um,
there's a line from Eric Weinstein, which is that like it's pathological to put to place like a systemic or structural problem at the feet of an individual. Um, and I think that's pointing to a little bit of like the problem with this blame game that goes around of like, oh, the women are choosing to not have kids, therefore they're the problem, or the men are not stepping up and getting the requisite career, financial success, whatever it may be, to provide, or they're choosing to just not have kids because they want to do other things. Um, and so
well,
I think
yeah,
avoiding,
I 100% agree that you
yeah,
don't want to, and there's plenty of, there's plenty of fault all around. we should say.
So let's talk about systemic solutions.
Okay, yes, I'd love to. And that so uh, the first thing that I like to talk about is, but there is really just one fully developed country that has above replacement fertility. And you can go ahead. You probably know what that is?
That's Israel.
Right. Yes, Israel. And I think there's a tremendous amount to learn from Israel. Israel is, housing is expensive. Uh, they have a lot of education. They're very technological. And in fact, women get significantly more education than men in Israel, as in most developed countries. So, uh, the GDP is high. It has so many factors that where we see low fertility in most other countries, but there is one factor that they have going for them, which other countries don't, which is strong pronatal belief.
Hmm.
And that seems circular, to have a lot of children, you need to believe in having a lot of children. That seems actually circular, but it's not. I mean, that's actually foundational, and we should not look past the most obvious point. And if you talk to Israelis, if you try to study why Israel has higher birth rates, um, the fundamental answer is that in Israel, people believe deeply that having children is of paramount importance. This is believed among secular Jews in Israel, among the ultra religious, and everyone in between. So there's this uh, strong belief, and that's really an incredibly important driver. And I another example of that, there's just two present examples in the world of countries that have gone below replacement, and have come back above it. Uh, and that is, that are presently above replacement. That, during the baby boom, a ton of countries went from below replacement to above replacement.
Hmm.
But in the modern, in the year 2025, there's not a lot that are in that category right now. But two of them are Mongolia and Kazakhstan.
Okay.
And both of them, very interestingly, have this national award. Um, they call it the Order of Maternal Glory,
Hmm.
or similar thing. Both of these countries, the prime minister or the president themselves, it makes a really big deal of having a national celebration, uh, specifically for mothers who have many children, and that
Hmm.
uh, in both of those countries, it's a really big deal for a mother to have a lot of children. And, I had a post about this, I think in August, about Mongolia in particular, the big, huge celebration that they go through to celebrate mothers. And I had a thread showing, some of the pictures, where these mothers coming down the steps uh, of the presidential palace in Ulaanbaatar with the giant multi-story statue of Genghis Khan at their back.
Yeah,
Really
right.
extraordinary. And actually, that tweet went viral. Elon Musk actually retweeted that, among others.
Hmm.
And but it really shows an important point, which is that if you simply have a culture that says, having children is extremely important, we value this among almost anything else, that that is a very important factor that can kind of, and what I like, what I think is really valuable about that is that it's very freedom oriented. In other words, Israel is a free country with rights. In a society like that, somebody can choose to have no children, and nobody's gonna, you know, no, nobody's gonna stop. They're not gonna get in trouble. I mean,
Yeah.
they may have aunties pestering them, but that's fine. That's perfectly compatible with freedom. Uh, but these questions of how do you deal with long women's education or men's education, or how do you deal with uh, the sort of the hurdles of modern society? Uh, the answer is maybe, some of those things you can't change it, or you can't go back on it. But what you can do is uh, lean much harder
Hmm.
into the value of having children directly, and then a lot of things will, and that'll pull a lot of other things along. Like, for example, in Israel, the marriage rates are much higher and people marry younger, I'm sure that has everything to do with the fact that having children is a very, very high priority in
Yeah.
Israel.
So one of the things that I've had discussions about with friends over the years is the importance of making motherhood high status among women. And that if you do this, which is I think basically what you're talking about. I mean, you phrased it in terms of the belief in high fertility, that you can actually get a lot accomplished by just simply doing that. And I think this is borne out in, for example, the in local um, mimetics, where if you have a woman and she's part of a social group with lots of other mothers, but she's the only one who hasn't had a child, I think that just the simple social reinforcement of the other women my age are beginning to have children, or they have children, and that's sort of the loci of their lives and their social interactions.
Right,
I
right,
think
right.
that has a huge impact. Um, and there's probably some tipping point where if too many of your friends are single or childless, you're more likely to lean into that direction and vice versa.
Yeah, um, yeah, I totally agree. Fertility is very contagious.
Mm,
It's, studies have shown that if 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 other women in a woman's friend group or social circle are getting pregnant, then those women are much more likely to get pregnant themselves. So, yeah, there is a very strong uh, social component, and we can use the example of actually South Korea, the lowest fertility country in the world. Who are the cultural leaders in South Korea?
mm,
It's the K-pop bands.
yeah.
Yeah, and the whole thing with them is that they're all single. Like it's not just coincidence either that some of them, I don't know if they still do that, but they've typically had contracts where they're not allowed to have a girlfriend or a wife because you're not as good of a heartthrob if you're if you're
Oh,
if you're so they act so and these uh you know BTS is probably more culturally influential in Korea like than the prime minister and whatnot. So here they are trying to hand out baby bonuses while BTS is glamorizing uh a, lu- a luxurious or very high status childless lifestyle. So uh, you're you're kind of valorizing the opposite of what you want to if you have a birth rate crisis.
yeah. Well, so there's the meme about if Taylor Swift had a child, right? Then suddenly you'd like fix the fertility crisis overnight.
It wouldn't hurt. It really wouldn't hurt. It really wouldn't hurt.
Yeah.
Um, and so yeah, there are. I don't want to. It's not just one factor, and we can, uh, go over different factors, but that is kind of and one thing I try to emphasize about fertility is that you can think of it as like a fertility stack. You've heard Scott Adams talk about the talent stack.
Yeah.
It's like with sort of the talent stack, like the more factors you have in your favor, like your your value in the on the market, or in a company is going to exponentially increase.
Right.
We can think of something similar with fertility. There's a lot of variables. What's the highest fertility group in the United States?
I would guess the Amish.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good guess. And uh, they're a wonderful example of the kind of the fertility stack because they have the highest fertility. They're the average among Amish I think is 6 births per woman. So that's your average. But there are Amish groups like the Schwarzentruber uh, is one particular sect within Amish. The fertility of them is something like 10 births per woman. Now that's the average. I mean this is
Wow.
probably almost unprecedented in world history, and to have them all survive. So those Amish groups are probably having the fastest growth like that world history has ever seen. And and
Yeah.
and because in the past, high birth
10x
rates
growth rate.
were not unknown in the past,
Mhm.
but
But infant
but
mortality.
but infant mortality was high, but now probably almost 100% of those children are surviving, So if you can imagine a TFR of 6 or 10 with everybody surviving, that's really remarkable. But the thing with the Amish is, and that kind of gets into what I'm talking about with a fertility stack of factors. There's a so the we can look at the Amish. They have uh, uh, pronatal belief.
Hmm.
That's that as we talked about, that's an important fertility factor. They have marriage, a very strong marriage culture, and a culture of early marriage. Um, they have very short educations. I was in Pennsylvania in October, and happened to come across a couple young Amish guys, and of course I had to have a whole conversation with them because, of course, uh, and you know they had finished school at the in after eighth grade. This is something, by the way, that the Amish won a Supreme Court decision for. So they, early education, um, early marriage, pronatal belief, and they also the housing situation among the Amish is like perfect for fertility because they spread out across the land. They're like Amish people are like house builders
Hmm.
extraordinaire. Like this is
Yeah.
what they're known for is like all getting together and like erecting a house or at least framing it out in one day, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
so
I,
they have housing another fact. So you have all these factors all lined up in their favor. Early marriage, pronatal belief, religiosity, abundant housing, uh, plenty of space to expand outward.
mhm.
One thing about the Amish is that when a settlement starts to become kind of big,
Yeah, they
then
have
they
to
then
disperse.
then they disperse
Mhm.
exactly and start new settlements. That kind of spreading out horizontally. I really try to emphasize that is actually a pronatal factor that is not well discussed. The fastest growth rate of any country in history is probably like the United States from its founding until about 1900. And what was that characterized by? That was characterized by constant uh, expansion and pioneering onto new lands. So if
Mhm.
you have an energetic 20-year-old who's willing to work hard, they can just go west, you know, make something work, get married and have a big family, and then their kids can do it again. And generation after generation, you had this incredible expansion with a kind of horizontal room to grow. So that's kind of a through the lens of the Amish, you can kind of see how a bunch of fertility factors can work together. And one we're and the thing to remember is that if each of those factors helps by some fraction, then
Mhm.
you add it up, you can have a big effect from a lot of little factors. And again, like with Scott Adams' talent stack, these things kind of work together and reinforce each other.
So there are three things I would like to ask you about this, using the Amish as an example. One is, what role do you think like proximal community support plays in fertility? That is like my what I've heard just anecdotally many times that like one way to reliably increase fertility, or even if you eventually get married, um, you're going to need to live near your, in my case, wife's uh, family, because grandparents are going to play a big role in facilitating the care of children. And the Amish obviously have very tight social and familial connections, whereas a lot of Americans, people like myself, I'm in a city where I'm thousands of miles away from my family of origin, and in the case of my recent girlfriend, so was she. And so even if we decided to have children, uh, we wouldn't have been near any kind of social support network outside of our friends, basically. And so I wanted to ask you, like, how important do you think uh, sort of local support networks are to fertility?
Oh, it's tremendously important, and again, and this is again important for us to understand about the problem is that there's many factors. I mean, uh, the thing that you're referring to is called allo-parenting. It's like
Right.
parenting by people other than the parents, and as you said, like the by far the biggest provider in the modern world of allo-parenting is actually grandparents, and it has been said that Israel runs on grandparents. I think maybe it was Paul, my friend Paul Moreland, who's an amazing demographer in the UK, author of many books. Um, I think that he's the one who said that Israel runs on grandparents. I think it was him. Um, he he is actually a grandparent who has a daughter in Israel who anyway he's traveled to Israel to I think daughter son it's one of his some of his at least one of his children is in Israel and he has gone there to do exactly that to do grandparent allo-parenting.
Hmm.
Uh, but and demographer Lyman Stone has also emphasized a lot about the value of allo-parenting. Just these familial networks and this um, it's a lot of some very poor countries like in Africa where they don't have a lot of money, but they manage to have very high birth rates. How do they do it? Alloparenting is a big factor. So yes, that is a significant factor that uh, we 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 struggle with in the modern world.
And then the other thing I wanted to ask you about, and this is related to the Amish as well as the example of Israel to some degree. And actually, we should maybe parse out how much of this in Israel is the secular population and how much of it is the religious population. But is the component of religiosity. Um, so, you've talked about a belief in high fertility, but obviously that is pretty hard to untangle from a religious community that has a pro-child religion. Um,
Well, yes.
so,
So yeah, religiosity is an important factor. There's
mm,
no question. That is, I talk about uh, four factor. There's four factors that I think belong kind of on the top of the fertility stack, as in, being having extraordinary weight for fertility, and um, so one of them that I talked about is having a pronatal belief. Um, Another one is religiosity, which obviously intersects a lot with pronatal belief. Religiosity is often a source of pronatal belief, and then a third, gigantic factor is marriage, and a fourth factor that I think is incredibly significant is, we can call it housing, space, this whole factor. I think that is incredibly significant. That's actually the one thing that I think Israel is lacking. Um, but talking about is Israel is their high fertility a result of the Haredi population? A lot of people ask that, and
mhm,
it is to an extent, but the vast majority of Israelis are not Haredi, and secular Jews in Israel have twice the fertility of secular Jews in uh, in the
the
UK
United
or the United
States.
States.
Yeah.
So that's a strong indication that there is something else, sitting on top, another factor at play there. And it's not a mystery because you can just, you know, talk to Israelis, talk to people who have studied this, and the thing that jumps out over and over again is that in Israel, it's literally considered extremely important to have kids. I mean, it's through all the tragic history uh, that the Jewish people went through in the 20th century and so on and so forth, and the threats that they're under today. You know, the the founding prime ministers, uh, Golda Meir and uh, David Ben-Gurion, right?
Mhm.
Ben-Gurion especially, I think, was a very intense and explicit, pronatalist. Israel in its founding one of its founding principles was, guys, please have a lot of children.
Yeah.
That was it, again, we shouldn't overlook the most, the most straightforward Occam's razor answer uh, to how many children you'll have is how many children you want. And that, and
Yeah.
if the broader culture says, it's important to have a lot of children, that's going to that's going to have an outsized impact. And we can also look at another country that's been not fully successful, but more successful than any other country in Europe, which is France. And in France, it's Macron said like a year or two ago, he called for a demographic rearmament.
Hmm.
Like that's pretty explicit, right?
Yeah.
That's pretty nakedly asking people to please have more children. And in France, I guess that's like a normal thing, but in in a Western country, we think that sounds like Hitler or something. But you know, we shouldn't, and that's a kind of a problem is that pronatalists think that um, that explicitly encouraging people to have children is, they have a negative connotation with that because they think that uh, that may in some people's minds that has associations with negative regimes, but it also should have we should consider that a universal thing, uh,
Yeah,
like
I think that's
we
kind
should
of a
look at.
mind virus if you
Yeah. I mean,
are
we
so
can look
guard like
at countries like Israel
mhm.
or France or Mongolia. These are countries where, pronatal belief has had a tremendous positive impact, and they're, you know, I mean, I don't know. I mean, of course, the Mongolians were the world's invaders, 1,000 years ago, but
Sure.
we're not worried about the Mongolians lately, right?
So,
Um,
so I wanted to ask you a little bit about the economic arguments around fertility. Um, it's very common in sort of contemporary American discourse, for example, to talk about economic limitations or economic barriers to family formation being a big contributor, right? Either men aren't making enough money or their careers aren't getting started, you know, as quickly as in prior generations, or the cost of living is too high in cities, or the cost of childcare is too high. And frankly, I just don't buy any of these arguments at all because the higher GDP countries have lower fertility overall. And obviously, people were having lots of children back when economic prosperity was much more rare. And so, what is your take on these sort of economic success arguments?
yeah, Alex, I 100% agree. Yeah, that's what we see. The world has gotten richer,
Hmm.
and fertility has gone down. And not only that, but we've witnessed, countries as they have had like economic, e- you know, huge economic progress, their fertility has gone down as that's happened, so that we can see that phenomenon uh, in inside of countries as they develop, and also across countries uh, between rich countries today and poor countries today. So um, I don't want to say that money is is the problem exactly, but there's a lot of things that go along with it, particularly uh, the demands of work. If you have uh, men and women both working full time and in a wage earning job, 40 or more hours a week, it's logistically just incredibly hard uh, to have a family just because there's it work is kind of directly it can be directly in conflict with having children. Both are important, but if your culture uh, prioritizes making money over everything else, especially above family, um, family is literally going to be uh, pushed out, squeezed out. This is certainly the case across East Asia, where you've had, Korea, China, previously Japan. You had some of the fastest growth rates like ever seen in world history, but fertility also crashed to far below replacement at the same time. Um, and so economic growth is good, prospering is good,
Mhm.
but I think uh, we have to remember that family can actually be in direct conflict with that, um, but as a result of the demands of time, and you have to there's a great index that I tweeted about maybe a month ago that somebody came up with called the baby money index,
Hmm.
BMI. So BMI is no longer a measure of how fat you are.
Yeah.
It's now a measure of so the baby money index takes into account like the economic, GDP or gross national pro GNP. There's a financial measure of the per capita economic output. I think it wasn't GDP, but a similar one.
Hmm.
And they also take times fertility squared. So this factor, um, so a country to actually be thriving, we can't just use, economic output as the measure. Actually, um, all the, so the highest scoring country on this measure, of course, is Israel. Let me see if we can pull up a map of that. Uh,
Well, I also know that there's a U-shaped chart with regard to income and fertility, where at the very low end of income you actually have high fertility, and there are probably cultural and behavioral reasons for that. But you in the middle class, fertility basically craters
right?
until you start getting into the upper middle class and then to the wealthy. And then when you start getting far beyond average income, then your fertility goes back up again
Yeah.
to
So let's
above.
talk about the U shape a little bit because
Yeah,
so this is not among countries. So unfortunately, there was this hope. We have seen that as countries get richer, their fertility declines. That's
right.
been a
So
pattern
it's
around the
within
world.
countries, which means that it's relative.
Right. Yeah, so there's a couple things I want. So there had been this hope like maybe 10 or more years ago that we see as countries get richer their fertility falls, but the idea was that, well, if countries get even richer, then all of a sudden it will recover again. That was the hope.
Mhm.
But further data, 10 more years of data has showed that that doesn't seem to be the case. But within country, what you're talking about, yes, we see that. We see it you know, and it depends actually. It depends actually what demographic groups you're looking at. But uh, you are correct that at low incomes, it's a little bit easier, paradoxically, because um, if there's a lot of financial help from the government and you're not working, you actually have time for childcare. The middle class, the as I was saying, something that's incredibly difficult for having a family is when you have two people working full time. That is incredibly uh, difficult. I've had, you know, my sisters have that kind of arrangement. I love them. It's what they're doing is like maximum difficulty, and I have incredible respect for what they're doing. But it is not easy. And I think what you see at the high income levels probably in a lot of cases uh, is one income where you have one parent working full time, earning a high income, and then one parent is able to stay at home, and then a lot of problems unwind from that. I saw a study. Um, I don't know if it was Yale graduate, maybe Princeton graduates, like 20 years later or something. 90% of the men were still working, but just 60% of the women were. And it's not that they didn't have incredible talents, but they were in the economic class where they had the option to not work and raise a family full time, and that again is what you're seeing at the high end. So yeah, that's a very difficult problem. Is if our only metric is economic success, and you have people working on it all the time, uh, both both parts of a couple working full time, you're going to lose uh, your economic gains very quickly. You're gonna lose everything if fertility crashes. And this baby money index that I was talking about a minute ago, you know, some of the worst performing countries, ironically, on that index are actually East Asian countries that are working so intensely. There's a term. Uh, Derek Thompson of The Atlantic coined this term workism.
Mm.
Workism is where work and career, take total preeminence in a person's life, a, as your highest value. And if that's the case, and it pushes out family, um, very naturally you're gonna have a birth rate crisis. And we see in even a lot of countries that are developing very quickly, not just in Asia, but also another example is Poland. Poland's fertility is down to 1.1, and I think a lot of that is down to workism.
Mm.
This focus very intensely on work above everything else. So I really think that it's very easy to do because it's very tempting to, the capitalist system and the chance to make money and then make more money, get more things. It's very tempting, and that's not a bad thing, but beyond a certain point, um, you need to emphasize family very, very hard in the modern world. The problem isn't economic output in the modern world. The problem is uh, the
Human
production
output.
of the production of more people is where our
Mhm.
crisis lies.
Yeah.
That's and so you really need to emphasize that actually much harder than you did in the past. That's my simplest answer, and then that should hopefully, feed into a bunch of other things.
I want to talk to you a little bit about embattlement, which is the term that Robin Hanson used in his discussion with you. You mentioned already Israel as a country sort of founded on the idea of creating more children, more Jews for the homeland. Uh, there's also the baby boom after World War II, which is a rare point in history where you see fertility go above replacement, right, in these westernized nations. Um, and so, what is your position on the sort of the idea that fertility is hard to fix without some sort of crisis or external threat?
Well, the country that has been one country that has been incredibly embattled, I don't know if you want to call this the most embattled, but maybe is Ukraine.
Hmm.
And Ukraine has a giant threatening neighbor, threatening to totally take it over. They're embattled, fighting for their continued existence as a country. Their fertility is maybe around 1.0. I don't think there's been any kind of, so
Do you imagine it will surge after the war is over?
I mean, I don't know the answer. But
Because I
I
I think they don't have any men left at the moment.
yeah, no, it's terrible. It's
No, I
heartbreaking, and
mean,
and it's
yeah.
it's it's really it's really a very uh, tragic thing. But I do want to emphasize, with Israel, they talk about it. You know, the Ben Gurion didn't just it wasn't just that Israel was embattled, it was that he declared the importance of having children a ton of times. Israeli leaders like in an Israeli cabinet, you'll have people with 10 or 12 children, like in the Israeli cabinet and whatnot.
Hmm.
It's very explicit, and I think that we're very shy about talking about it, but we shouldn't be. I do want to emphasize, people say, does that have shades of totalitarianism? I think actually the opposite is true. I think the most freedom-oriented solution is just to tell people the truth. We have a fertility crisis, we need more children, and within that framework, people can get to work in different ways. You could have, uh, one of the hallmarks that we see of pro-natalist countries, and you can see this very strongly in the data of Kazakhstan,
Hmm.
is is that um, is that you have high parity. That means that people have when people do have children, people have a lot of children. Um, and that's true in Israel too. But you could see in Kazakhstan when they started to really have pro-natal leadership that was encouraging people to have children. The number of people that had one child didn't actually go up that much. Uh, but you went from like a society where three children was very rare to a society where 5 children is common. So they just so the the nice thing about having a pronatal culture is that people, some people don't, maybe people don't want to go along with it. They don't have to. But what you really find is that uh, is that, and I think that that's actually the easiest path to higher fertility
Mm.
because it's very hard for somebody to complete their education, uh, to become economically productive, to find a partner, to get married. These are major milestones that a lot of people won't cross. So the people, that, so once somebody crosses it, if they can be, you know, encouraged or persuaded to have a big family, having 4 children might not be that different from having two. Once you've already had to have your job, you've already had to get married, you already had to get buy your house in the suburbs, you already had to do a lot of difficult things, and then uh, adding a there's a joke about big families. You just add a little more water to the soup, and you're all set.
Yeah,
It's
you
a
get you get you get decreasing marginal costs of having more children, right?
oh, it's a lot. You were gonna go to the zoo anyway.
Right.
Just maybe you get a minivan instead of a sedan and just toss a few more kids in there. Sometimes, those of us who are raising a lot of kids, sometimes the kids aren't even your own. Sometimes there's others tagging along, or your kids are tagging along with somebody else. This is part of a kind of a pronatal or kind of a culture of families that can really be supportive. But yeah, I think a pronatal culture is actually the most freedom-oriented solution because, it could be, uh, you know, and I talk a lot about Big Tent pronatalism. It could be, uh, you know, even a gay couple, choosing to have children in a society that's welcoming of families however they come. It could be, your very religious family, going big. It can be, it can be, many different things, and you don't even have to. It's like almost like a free market. You don't
Mm,
even have to know how you're gonna where the solution is going to come from. But if you have this kind of this invisible hand of pronatalist culture pushing people, I don't want to say pushing, but urging or persuading people, um, and you're really relying on people to be mature adults, and you're telling them the truth. We have a crisis. We need more children, and people want to do the right thing. And ironically, we're in an opposite situation right now where people are getting the message that the planet's overpopulated. That there's too many people, and people think I'm doing the right thing by having less children, and nothing could be further from the truth. But that's kind of the message. All of the ultra low fertility countries in Asia, where the TFR is below 1.0, all of
mm,
those countries uh, have a history of population control propaganda.
mm.
Like everything, I have a thread uh, that's pinned on my Twitter at the moment about Thailand. Thailand they never even got rich. Uh, they just had population control messages one right after the other, and they blew right past a TFR of 2.0, and they just kept running in the same direction, and their fertility in 2024 was 0.95.
Wow.
So they're approaching South Korean levels, and their
I had no
GDP
idea.
and their GDP per capita is like 7K a year. So they
Yeah.
never even got rich, but they hosted like the the big global family planning conference most recently. This is a country with a TFR falling below one. Like, what are they doing? Like, trying to lead the world in population control at this point. But you have really had a phenomenon. South Korea had these intensive messages. China, of course. What's interesting actually about China is that fertility crashed in China before the one-child policy. It was
Yeah.
actually the antenatal messaging and
The
propaganda that
population bomb and its consequences.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. So that this is still a message that's reverberating strongly through the culture
Mm.
even today. Kind of a lot of people haven't gotten the memo, or the momentum is such that people that were teaching it are still teaching it. Never mind that the data is pointing to demographic collapse in many countries.
So I want to talk to you a little bit about technological solutions. I'm of the age where, a number of female friends that I know have gotten eggs frozen. And, if they haven't tried IVF or at least positioning to potentially try to use that as a fallback. And there's also some other individuals I know who are working on things like embryo selection. I talked to Stephen Chu a while ago. Um, and I remember remarkably, I was in San Francisco back in December, walking down, I think I was on Market Street. So I'm literally like downtown San Francisco, and I see that like in this prime commercial real estate is this fertility clinic. And and San Francisco might be like the epicenter of the class of people who have this idea that, if I just wait and wait and wait and get my career in order, then maybe eventually I'll meet someone to marry and then decide to have children. Um, and so I wanted to ask you, like, what do you think is the efficacy of these technological interventions, particularly for women later in life? And, how do you think about them with regard to solving this problem? They're probably not your first solution.
Well, I do say that we need to have a big tent, and I really believe that we don't know where all the answers are going to come from, but also we shouldn't be fighting uh, with people who should be our allies. You know, I do think uh, I do think that there is a little bit of a risk, um, particularly with uh, egg freezing and for if if you if you wait, unfortunately we still have not really found a way uh, to help women to have uh, children much past the age of 40. It's just for all of so that's still a pretty difficult limit. There is no substitute uh, for people partnering and trying to have a family in their earlier on, preferably in their 20s. The fertility, there's a term called fecundability.
Mhm.
Fertility, we talk about how many children people have and so forth. Fecundability is how easy it is to get pregnant in a given month. So fecundability is 3 times as high at age 20 as it is at about age 33. That doesn't mean a woman at age 33 is infertile, but she is two-thirds less fertile than she was at age 20 or 21. So there is just no substitute uh, for trying to, have a family when you're young, when you're in your 20s. So I don't, there's a risk of overselling it in terms of like, what it what is possible because the limits are pretty hard and the problem isn't solved. At the same time, you know, the support for IVF subsidies, I think in the United States is probably something like 80%. Is one of the It would be one of the most popular policies out there, and we should Israel has very strong support of that, and I think we should have a society that's supportive of family in many different ways. You don't want people fighting about it. You want the right and the left to both be on board with pronatalism. It's kind of I'm not it's not delightful to see that pronatalism has become politicized. Actually, I'd rather see I've said to people I think a pronatalist on the left is worth 10 pronatalists on the right because there's just such a lack of uh, of it has become politicized and there's not enough pronatalists on the left and and there are it's not only so that you have buy-in from across society, which is incredibly important. That is one thing, but also um, there's there's another thing that the left brings different perspectives. For example, uh, the Republicans these days seem to be quite against work from home, but
Mhm.
Lyman Stone, he's a well-known demographer.
Mhm.
He has shown in some research. He hasn't had a big paper on this yet, I don't think, but we need that paper. But he has shown in American community survey data that fertility is vastly higher by like maybe 60% higher for women who work from home than women who commute to a job. So it makes a vast difference, and this is something that uh, that the a more balanced political perspective might include. Uh, and that there's other things too. The fact that I think the majority of women in their 20s are on the political left. Um,
Sure.
so you really you really want buy-in from across the political spectrum. That's an important point.
Um, so it sounds to me like really what you're trying to get is some kind of you referenced the fertility stack multiple times. And it sounds to me like what you really want is sort of like a secular stack. Um, Not secular in the sense of being explicitly anti-religious, but secular in the sense that it's a stack of cultural or social economic tools that we could implement as a society to get fertility back on track, independent of particular uh, a particular, let's say, religious culture.
Yeah, well, it's an open question actually whether you can have high fertility in the modern world without religious belief. That in theory it should be possible. Um, Actually, the example that I gave of Mongolia is actually one such example. Mongolia is not particularly religious, and where it is religious, their religion is Buddhism, which Buddhism has like basically no pronatal element. The
Hmm.
Buddha actually like he literally left his family in order to, seek enlightenment by himself.
Right.
Right, and there's and the highest one of the highest religious callings in Buddhism is to be a monk, which is to swear off family and the material world and become celibate. So this is not so that's the religion of Mongolia, but they have this pronatal belief that I was talking about, and that so it is technically possible to have uh, high fertility without religious faith, but it's pretty uncommon. I mean, almost all the high fertility groups that you find in the world,
Mm.
from the Amish to the Orthodox Jews to trad Caths or whatever are religious, but there are many other factors. So if you we don't we certainly don't want to create any kind of forced religion or anything like that. Your policy there is to have a policy of, I would say, wide religious freedom. One interesting thing that has happened in America is that sort of the mainline denominations, uh, the old churches in America have gone down, but America has had a culture of sort of religious innovation. You have uh, kind of new independent churches springing up, not attached to any denomination that kind of um, one big problem with Europe's steep secularization is that there is no religion. When the mainline churches have declined, there wasn't any kind of new churches coming up in their wake. But in the United States, we've had that. But okay, but to leave the religion question, issue aside, although as I say, I do think that is uh, a very high impact element of the fertility stack. But there, some others that you can work on. Education duration is another one. If you can find a way to speed up education tracks, that's important. Work-life balance. I was talking about telework and the pronatal aspect there, um, but just in general, parental leave, things like that. Parenting norms. You were bringing that up, where expectations are too high, where people are trying too hard. Um, Parents make it very difficult for themselves. Um, uh, Gender tension is a big problem. You have this political, one thing that I like to point out is actually um, interpolitical marriage, like as in between like a Democrat and a Republican,
Yeah, it's
is a
basically
lot.
disappeared.
That's actually a lot less common now than interracial marriage. It's like way likelier that a black person and a white person will marry if they're both like Democrats or both Republicans than for like two white people. to marry. One is a Democrat and one is a Republican, or of some other race if they're across the political aisle. So definitely, you know, I what I definitely the political tension is a problem. One thing that I talk about in terms of getting over the tension um, is gender kind of there's a big issue with uh, countries like Korea, like Italy, that have very uh, where men uh, don't help with domestic stuff,
Mm.
generally as a cultural rule. I mean that a lot of the this you've heard of the 4B movement in South Korea,
Yeah.
perhaps, where
Mm.
women are swearing off of dating, marriage, children, sex, everything. Um, and that is a response to a perceived, uh, you know, chauvinistic culture, which may not be entirely incorrect. There's probably some truth to that. And the way the men can kind of solve that is to, try to work harder and do more domestically or in different ways, or kind of try to erase those boundaries. I think it's very unlikely that you'll ever get to a world where men are doing the majority of all domestic stuff. Even in very gender egalitarian countries like Sweden, women are still doing more, but men can really step up and at least soften the gender tension. So that's another thing I would recommend. Another point is sex ed, health class. You
Mm.
know, 100% of health class is focused on how to avoid pregnancy. We don't, health class doesn't talk at all, as far as I know, about like the fertility window or the fact that there's just a few days in the month when a woman can get pregnant, and they talking about how to have a family, how to make it happen, both in terms of your age and more specifically in terms of the monthly cycle stuff. I think that's hardly talked about. Um, especially the age fertility window. If I mean, every high school needs to be teaching this, needs to be teaching uh, young people, and then again, that gets back into the realm of like a free solution, a solution that's highly compatible with freedom. A big problem that people have is not having as many kids as they say that they would like, and the biggest limitation there probably is not having everything lined up in your life at the right time. But you need to be starting to plan that in high school. You need to be prioritizing finding a partner, when you're very young. You
Mm.
need to be thinking about how you're going to, plan your life so that you can have a family. You need to be thinking about that very young, because actually, the peak fertility is in your 20s and early 30s. And if somebody is finding themselves until the age of 40, the window has passed.
Yeah.
So,
So,
yeah, one other point,
mm.
um, almost never talked about, but should be talked about more is C-sections. Countries that have a high rate of unnecessary C-sections are important, and I don't want to dismiss them at all. They're very important in medically dangerous situations. Many women's lives are saved in childbirth, but you also have uh, you know countries or cities or hospitals where the C-section rate is 50, 60, 70%. You know, the 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 uh the World Health Organization says that about 15%, 10-15% of C-sections are medically necessary. So that there's another, and the data finds strongly that when women have one or more C-sections, then the total number of children that they will have is a lot less. Part of that is because there's some misconception that doctors, tell women, if you've had two C-sections or whatever, or three C-sections, stop having kids. That's that's probably bad advice. Women can have more C-sections than that. This is not medical advice, but I think we should keep in mind that there's a lot of conservatism and caution there. But excessive C-sections definitely are an issue. But anyway, these are some of the factors.
No, these are great. I
Uh,
know that a number of government programs, as far as tax incentives, haven't seemed to move the needle very much. Um, and so I'm curious about that. Um, I know that Hungary, for example, has tried very, very hard to get their fertility back up.
I'm glad you bring that up. No, policy supports are not a silver bullet. They're
Mm,
not going to solve this alone. But we what we need to be thinking about, and this is part of the when we talk about a fertility stack, if something can boost fertility by zero point 0.2 or 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 0.15 or zero point 0.3 or some amount like that, that's great. That's a huge, wonderful improvement. We have seen uh, you know, plenty of cases uh, where those kinds of incentives help. Like France is a good example where, for 80 years since World War II, they have had various pronatal policies and especially tax incentives uh, where parents, uh, where each child, and I think the way to describe it in France is uh, how their tax system works is you know how in the United States uh, if you have a married couple, then then you divide everything by two.
mm,
So like their effective income uh, is scaled by a factor of two, so a married couple pays a lot less taxes than 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 two single people earning the same income. Because and in France, additional children work that way also, where they also increase the sort of the number that you divide the whole income by.
mm,
So if you have a large family, then you take your whole income and divide it by a number, a large number, and that cuts your effective income by a lot. And so that's a very pronatal tax structure, and and that seems to have made a big positive influence on France's fertility, which has been higher than all its neighbors and most of the rest of Europe. For those 80 years that it's been consistently pushing those policies. So we should not neglect that. That is part of what I call this fertility stack. These are, having, and you shouldn't get rid of these policies, but you should also realize that your largest levers are in things like culture and education.
mm.
I do want to talk about housing a little bit because that's something I'm known for.
Sure. Well, let's address housing then. We've got a little bit of time left. Um, so my understanding of your position is that vertical housing uh, is generally harmful to fertility. And people talk a lot about YIMBYism versus NIMBYism, building more housing just in general. But I think your attitude is generally that you want more distributed housing, you want more horizontal housing. Is that right?
That's a pretty good, yeah. And I arrived at this, by looking at the data, and I can show something um, that's kind of illustrative of this. Here, let me do one more screen share here. Let's see. So what we see here, you're seeing this here?
Yes.
Yeah, so what we're seeing is a fertility map of Greater Sydney. So this is the Greater Sydney metropolitan area um, in 2022, and we see, for those who are just listening on the podcast, we see in the urban core of Sydney, fertility is just around 1.0,
Hmm.
and in the suburbs, in these single family homes, and that's how that's how Sydney is built. You have an urban core that has a lot of urban high-rise apartments, and then you have leafy suburbs around Sydney that are all single family homes. And this area you can see on this fertility map, um, the area where you have uh, single family homes has a fertility of around 2, and the fertility in the urban core is around 1.0. This is an astonishing, massive, massive gap. Um, and there's this claim that people make, oh, it's really down to price. Um, but that's not true because the suburbs in Sydney are incredibly expensive. They're and so really what you're seeing is a strong impact of housing type, another point that I want to make is that it's not even clear uh, that cheap housing will give you higher birth rates at all. And I'll use the example of Countries like China and Japan and Korea. In Seoul, the rents in for an apartment are 75% cheaper than in New York City.
Hmm.
In across and the fertility in downtown Seoul is around zero point 0.5. In Shanghai or in China, you have very affordable apartments. They have an actual abundance of apartments, and fertility in downtown Shanghai is anywhere between zero point 0.4 and zero point 0.7, depending on what part of the city you're looking. And so cheap small apartments do not seem to be pronatal at all. They seem to be antenatal in the data. That's
Hmm.
and one aspect to that is that uh, it enables it enables people to live very cheaply by themselves. One thing that uh, about 24 hours ago, I posted about how the marriage rate in China has dropped by 50%, or the number of marriages in China has dropped by 50% in uh, in about the last decade. And actually, Elon Musk, he he replied to that tweet with the words "population collapse."
Yeah.
Uh, so that was just in the last 24 hours. Um, but China has an abundance of high-rise apartments, and their marriage rate keeps collapsing, and that may be it may be that the abundance of cheap apartments may actually be driving down the marriage rate by making it uh, there's a strong incentive for people to cooperate and form households actually when they need to work together. But when uh, apartments are incredibly cheap, as they are in China, as they are in across East Asia, it's very easy for people to stay single forever and not work together. Uh, and so I think we need to really think about the kind of housing that's family appropriate and family friendly, and you know apartments in high rises, even if they're very very inexpensive, don't seem to be associated with higher fertility at all. In fact, the lowest fertility rates that we see in the world are where people live like that. And I don't want, I've gotten in it a little bit with Brian Kaplan. I hope to have actually a debate with him. But one thing about him is that he relies on uh, like conceptual arguments, but he doesn't look at the data.
Hmm.
If you look at the data, you know, the gradation is overwhelming. And we see this in London. We see this in virtually, every metropolitan area in the world. As you get closer to the, to where most people are living in high-rise apartment towers in urban cores, fertility rates are incredibly low, and that is even if these apartments are very inexpensive as they are in Asia. So there's a claim that people make that the reason for low fertility in these apartments is that they're just too expensive, and if you just build more of them and make them cheap, you're going to solve the problem. But Asia has already run this experiment in many many Asian countries to build high-rise towers in abundance, and the result is not improved fertility, but the lowest fertility rates that you see in the entire world. So we have to follow the data and not our simple intuition. But there is uh, there are different factors. Having a yard for kids to play in, having a situation where um, in an apartment, children are going to bother the neighbors. So these are kind of fuzzy factors, but there's actually some hard factors at play as well. In the United
Hmm.
States, almost all, greater than 90%, maybe 94% or so of new apartments are two bedrooms or less. So three bedrooms is what you need. Um, it's almost a legal requirement. If you have a boy and a girl and one parent at least, um, there's circumstances where Child Protective Services will literally count
Yeah.
that as a factor against you to take away your children if you have uh, and I think that's more in the case of adoption that they will consider a two-bedroom apartment to be uh, it's actually against the law for
Mm.
adoption to have a two-bedroom apartment if you have one at least one parent and a boy and a girl. So this is just a very small family, and that's already too many in most apartments in the United States. Uh, there was a time when it was completely normal to stuff a whole bunch of people in one room, but that's not the world we live in today. And there's an expectation that that at least the boys have their own bedroom, the girls have their own bedroom, and the parents have their own bedroom separate from that.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the norm for that's kind of the baseline minimum for a family according to the norms that we have today. And only 6 or 7% of apartments even qualify. So
Right.
that's a pretty hard uh, limit on family size that's really obvious.
Right. And it's
So
built right into the housing.
it's built
Um,
into the law, at least for adopt. Now this is, I want to be clear that this isn't the law for all families, but it's strongly, the law in California for adoptions reflects culture generally, and
mm.
it's strongly, frowned upon to have a large family I mean, to have even a medium-sized family and I experienced this in interviews where I went around to, near where I live in Bethesda, Maryland. I was talking to people. I talked to one young man. Um, he was uh, college educated. He was married, high income. He
Mm.
and his wife had one child. He was living in an apartment tower. Um, and he said he would love to have four children, but he doesn't have space, and he is living in the largest unit in the building, which is a
Right.
two-bedroom unit, and so they're just it's literally a hard cap on family size, these
Yeah.
apartments, and so we have to take it. One reason I emphasize it further is that what we build today is going to be the housing stock that we have, for many generations to come. I want to share one more image, if I may,
Well,
really
Daniel,
quickly.
I think we're
And
actually
we're
running
getting
out of time.
near the end of our time, but we
Yeah.
don't we don't have to do that. Um,
So, thank you so much for coming on. This has been a great conversation. I hopefully we'll see each other here in Austin during the next natal conference.
oh, I'm excited. It
Um,
would be great to meet you. And you say you did not come last time.
no, I didn't go last time. I haven't decided if I'll be in attendance to the conference itself, but I'm sure I'll see you around.
Oh, please come.
Um,
I will be speaking.
mm.
I will, you can, if you register with promo code Hess.
Oh,
Uh,
nice.
you you can you can get a discount.
For those
Uh,
listening, please also go ahead and use the promo code.
yes, yes, and you can follow me on uh, More Births.
Mhm.
Simple, two words pushed together. More Births on X. I have a pretty decent following, including uh, some very notable pronatalists. So including Elon Musk is one of the followers, but uh, yeah, and I appreciate follows there. I'm focused very intensively on solutions to the fertility crisis. So that's what I'm on, and
All
it's been a
right,
pleasure
Daniel
talking.
Hess, thank you so much for coming on. He's at More Births on X and morebirths.com to read his Substack and writing. Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex.